Success. Hi. Thank you all, just as Wendy said, for being here. I'm super excited to see how this goes. I just did it in person with some teachers in Kansas in Hutchinson. Um, and it was really fun. It was a really interesting conversation about what can photography tell us, and specifically as an interdisciplinary tool, what can photography do? And in order to get started, I'm actually going to prevail upon you to just take a minute, like put your phone face down, just like go back through your memory. And in your mind's eye, when you think of Kentucky, when you think of your state, what comes to your mind? And then when you've got it, Justin's got KFC, and I wonder, Justin, if you're as hungry as I am. In the chat box, just as Justin led us off, would you please just note down some description of that image that came to your mind when you thought of your state of Kentucky? Ooh, look at this. I love a chat box. I love noting how people think differently. Everybody's got their own beautiful picture in their head, but often we can discover that there are some themes. Um, so just scrolling through, I'm noticing people are appreciative of the mountains. The word beautiful is coming up a lot, rolling hills, farms. We've got historical figures. We've got horses. We've got sports, um, log cabins, the University of Kentucky. Oh my gosh, front porch sitting. I love that. We don't have a culture of front porch sitting in my area, and I just love that you've included that. Thank you. And that also makes me think of the size of a front porch and like the comfort of a seat. So it's like helping me draw a really beautiful picture in my mind, the beauty of the Capitol, the sight of the mountains themselves. Gorgeous sunsets has come up twice. And then somebody else here, Stephanie, I think you and I are on similar pages. I am also a bourbon fan. So Kentucky there. Color green, beautiful. Okay, so my friends, we're going to mark this. We're going to hold this as our pictures. Our community today, when we think of Kentucky, we think of sort of this accumulation of beautiful images.
No, I didn't make that mess.
And we're going to come back to it because what I have are some photographs from the collection of the museum where I work of Kentucky. And we're going to start by just looking at one of them as a starting place. And some of what we're about to do may be familiar from your time together with Brianna when you're kind of slow looking and thinking about what can an image show you. I'll flag for you that when that image is a painting, often students are pretty comfortable talking about see, think, wonder with a painting because they're like, oh yeah, this is like made up, whatever. But when we look at a photograph and we start to kind of unpack a photograph in the same way, it can take a little bit of extra oomph. So just putting that out there. But what I'm going to do is share my screen so that you can see the photograph. And let's see, we're going to go here. It's interesting. I don't think I understand what I'm looking at. Okay, we're gonna do this a different way. We're gonna stretch. I told Wendy that I have a new computer and I am confusing myself. So let's see if we can try this way. Hey, there we go. Okay, I just had to choose the right computer. Okay. So then we're gonna play the slideshow. Okay, so you can see on your screen then both the image on the leftmost side and then also our looking questions. So our first question is, what do you see? And this is where I'm going to be like really annoying, so apologies. But when I say, what do you see? I mean, what is something that you could point to? And I want you to think about why that might be valuable for your students to help them understand what it is to see something. So just like hold that in your mind. But I'm getting Skylar and Wiley are already adding things to the chat box. I love it. What do you see? I'd love to hear one thing from each person in the room today. So we're looking for about 77 items. And it's okay if you repeat, but we've got a light. What more do we see?
Spark over there.
Lights, interesting. A mine. Oh, Christy, I'm gonna need a little help. Hunker down on the car. I don't know what the car is. Would you mind unmuting and sharing me with me a little bit? What's the car?
Um, the like the platforms that they're on, they're actually driven like a car, and they have several layers like a train behind them,
Okay,
and they'll take the miners in underground so that they can get to different areas. My brother's a coal miner, and then my family's in it, so very
awesome.
familiar.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I didn't know that that was what that was. So I appreciate learning. We see helmets. It's really interesting to me that as people are sharing out in the chat, the light is getting a lot of attention. So it's coming up again and again in the chat. So there's a light on the hat. We see lights kind of more deep inside this darkened space. We see a reflection on this lunch pail or dinner pail. I guess when you're underground, there's no particular time of day outside, but I'm guessing a lunch pail. Marlena's adding darkness. Beautiful. Okay, so you all are incredible because you're actually naming things that we can point to. We can point to all of these things in this photograph. When we start to shift into the thinking component, we start to shift into this place of interpretation. So, like I said before, when we are saying, what do you see? And see is what you can point to versus what do you think? What's your interpretation? I'd love to hear from maybe two people. Why might it be valuable for your students to be able to differentiate between observing something and interpreting something? Why might that be valuable? And you'll see I do this so that I don't keep talking.
I don't mind to share. I'm an
Thank you.
ELA teacher. So when we talk about things that you actually see versus what you think about what you see, I would always apply that to reading and taking textual evidence. So if it's what you see, that's textual evidence, and you would have to quote that directly. If you're saying what you think about what you see, or in that case, read, then you would not put quotes around it because that's your own thoughts.
Thank you for that connection. That's beautiful. Um, Catherine's noticing between a right there and a think. It's a kind of a and a searching type question in reading. Beautiful. Okay. It helps to know what others see. Rachel, I really appreciate that too, because when we do this as a group, when we hear each other's things, like for instance, I learned from Christy what a car was. I got to learn from her. So using this kind of open-ended questioning, I'm sure you did this already, but just recognizing that your students are bringing tremendous assets as far as lived experience or cultural background or their own prior knowledge. And when we get an opportunity to look at an artwork and start talking about what we see, it's an opportunity to share about that, which is really cool. Leah is adding observation is what's there, interpretation is the observer's experience and point of view. Beautiful. Okay, I love this. So let's think together. So, what do you think about what you see in that photograph? We just named the whole list of what we see, but what do you think about what you see? Drop an idea in the chat. Kimberly starting us off with hard work. Leaving work. Ooh, dirty faces. Okay, Kara, I love what you just did. I'm going to call you out because what you did, which is really, really neat, is you said what you think and then you cited evidence from the image. That's so beautiful. That's such a nice way to use evidence to support an argument. Awesome. Christy's noting the word sacrifice. It's a hard job. This means something to me and my family. Thank you for sharing that, Robin. That's really beautiful. Crawling out of the shaft, perhaps to go to lunch. Oh, Marlene is telling a story. I love the story about a father supplying for their family. Um, so this is a person who values hard work and that's in the dark. Reminders of fathers or family members, a coal dust and shortened life. It could be dangerous. It's a hard job. So interesting that when we just look, it's just sort of a dispassionate inventory. But when we're allowing ourselves to think and feel about the artwork, we get into a very different place. And any number of these words and phrases in the chat could be an interesting prompt. Whether if you're in a history context, you could use it as a, okay, this is what we think when we see this. What do we need to know or understand in order to verify whether that's true or not? What kind of research what might we want to do? If we're in an English language arts context, we might use that as a prompt for a creative writing or even an argumentative writing opportunity, right? So there's lots of ways that we can use this. But here's what I want to do. I want to get into this wonder section. This wonder is an open-ended, based on what you see and what you think. What are you left wondering? What's open-ended? Would you please in the chat just note down anything that you're wondering? Ooh, is it a normal day or a special mission? We want to know more about this individual's life. Like it stretches out the duration of the photograph in that question. How many of these men were terrified? How many hours did they work? Where is this mine even located? How deep are they going? Where is it? Did they feel safe doing their jobs? How long have they been a miner? Is it Kentucky? Does he have a family? How many families are represented in this image? Where are the women? How old are they? I mean, what interesting questions. And again, applying that to your context, right? If you're an art teacher, thinking about that question of what would it be like to be in a place like this? Or what is the feeling of a person? How do you express a feeling to somebody who's never had the experience that this person is having? Is that something that your students might be interested in exploring in an artwork? How do they work those long hours like that? What a great question. So we have these really, really beautiful questions. And that to me is the fun of a See, Think, Wonder. I'll tag for you that if this is an interesting thinking routine for you, you can also stack it in different orders. So for example, you could start out with a wonder. You could say, hey kids, let's just look at the photograph all together and then pop off like 3 or 5 different questions. What are you wondering? And then when we've got those all logged, let's see if we can answer any of them by seeing and thinking. So you can reorder. So just as a starting point, as an idea. What I want to do though is start making connections. So this is like not a good slide because you can't actually see all these images. So I actually have the images in a slide deck for you so that you can copy, and then I gotta find my little chat box. Here we go. Here are the 3 artworks. So I'm going to invite you to click on the link in the chat, and you're going to go and see the 3 artworks, each on their own individual slide. And what we're going to do is look at them as a collective and think about when you compare those 3 different images, all of them are of Kentucky and all of them are of different parts of Kentucky in the late 1970s. What are 3 things that are different? So we're just looking for differences at this point. So if you would please click on the link and you're going to look at these 3 different images. When you look at the 3 of them, what are 3 things that are different? Beautiful. Thank you, Andrea. Noticing different genders and ethnicities. Gorgeous. What more is different? Ooh, interesting. Work versus leisure. So different activities. Beautiful. Different ages. Different surroundings. Felicity, would you be willing to unmute a little bit and tell me about this idea of pose versus spontaneous? I think that's a really interesting point. And if you're not in a spot where that's possible, I totally understand. Okay. If it comes to the time that you're able to, I'd love to hear your voice. So we've got specific locations. We've got how their bodies can move, right? Oh my goodness, I love that idea because what you just gave me, Kim, in your thought was recognizing how compressed the space of the minors is. And for these young women doing the splits in the middle of the street, not only can they move their bodies freely, but the space, it's a huge amount of space for them to move within. That's amazing. Different emotions, different moods. I love this. Okay, so then we notice three things that are different. Oh, no worries, Felicity. Thanks for trying. Rachel, oh my gosh, Rachel Losh, I need to know from you. Talk to me about value because not all of us may understand what you mean by that idea of value and gray tones. Would you be willing to unmute and share a little more?
Sure. So I come up from a visual art background and we teach value scale all the time. So if you
Yeah.
take a pencil and if the white of the paper is 1 and kind of a medium gray tone is 5, and then the very darkest black you can get out of your pencil is a 10. So when you look at each work of art, the value scale is completely used in each piece.
Yeah.
And then just where the lights and darks are, the light source, things like that.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
we've got this really bright white, at least to my eye, in the distance of the image with the three young women doing the splits, and then very dark value on the left side. Whereas in the image of the coal miners, there's not that breadth of value scale, which is really interesting to consider. Okay, now having named all these things that are different, let's talk about things that are the same. What are some things that are the same? Sarah is noting that there are family and friends and co-workers in this image. Love. What more? It's all outdoors. Okay, love. Susan's noting the land. Subjects, human subjects. Yep, so we don't have, like we named horses are one of the parts of Kentucky that came to our minds. No horses in this particular selection. Interesting. Okay. Lee or Leah, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Will you tell me more what you mean by the atmosphere of Kentucky? Because I've not been. I need to know more.
Well, I grew up in Kentucky, and many of these pictures look like they are pictures that could have come from my childhood. There is the flavor of what the landscape looked like, what it looked like to gather maybe in a park with your family for a picnic, and having, like many people on the chat, having people in my family in the mining industry. Our brains are filled with these images and these little snapshots that bring the flavor of Kentucky. I can stand on that. I feel like I can stand on that road and smell the smell of that road that the girls are doing the splits on. And I've been in the park, our little state park that's near here, having the picnic with my family, and then smelling the members of my family coming home from the mines in the evening. There's just a very, at times, brooding atmosphere, and at times a very joyous atmosphere in those pictures.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm so glad that you shared. And something that I'll note to you is that idea of smell is so deeply connected to memory. Like it's the way our brains are wired. And I love how smell can evoke emotion. It can evoke memory. And being able to bring that layer to inanimate objects is really beautiful. I really appreciate that. So we have the atmosphere, we've got snapshot of life. It's just sort of a moment in time. Beautiful. Okay, so we have these three images that are presented in a selection. So I think we've got about 50 images from the same time period, from the same big project, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. But I want to flag for you that these are three images made by three different photographers for the same project. So I would like to ask you to think about those photographers. Now I'm asking you to step a little bit away from your own memories and start to think about the photographers as documentarians. What do you notice about their styles when you compare them? Black and white, beautiful. What more? Tap into emotion at the moment. There's something candid, okay? Personal. Coal miner photo, the photographer is trying to show movement and urgency. So Rachel, interesting that we might call attention to these kind of blurry lines, right? The way that the light is streaking across the frame is an indicator of movement. And the others, they seem a little bit more static. They tell a story, they're very realistic. Maybe it's like a circle of life and experience. So the workers do the work to provide picnic and gymnastics. I love that we can sew these together real life. So now I'm going to invite you to imagine how close you would have to be physically as the photographer. Imagine taking this picture. Imagine taking the top picture of these people either going into or coming out of the mine. Imagine taking the picture of these three young women doing the splits on the pavement or on the road. Imagine being the photographer who's taking a picture of this family picnic. How close would you need to be? Are they standing at the same distance? Ah, so Rachel, interesting. You're noting that the way that the family picnic photo is shot, it's almost like the photographer is part of the group, right? That's a very different experience than the Kim is noting that if the photographer was taking a picture of the miner, the photographer would actually have to be like crouching down, and certainly not on a car because we would be in a line with these miners. But we can imagine that the photographer would need to be both close and crouched. I love that. And Angie's noticing they've got to figure out a way for the photographer to not get in the way of people coming out of work. That's really important too. Okay, so as we start to think about this, we're starting to consider the role of the photographer. And we've also started to anticipate two of the questions that I'm about to ask. I'm going to send you into breakout rooms in just a minute. And you're going to talk to each other about two different questions. The first one is, in what ways, plural, are the photos connected? And how do they connect to something you already know? And we've covered this, but I just want to make sure that it gets really clear for your group. And then the second question that you're going to cover in your breakout group is, in what ways, plural, do the photos expand upon one another? And then when I ask that question, think about it as in what ways does each image stretch your thinking about the other ones? Fair enough? Any clarity that needs to be offered on these photographs, the questions about the photographs rather? Okay, so then Miss King, I'm going to ask you, would you please send folks into breakout rooms of like 4 or 5 people, whatever you think is right for this group. It can be totally random. And we're going to spend, let's say 7 minutes, totally arbitrary number, talking about those 3 photographs and the 2 questions. I'll put them on a slide in the deck as well so that you can see them easily. Fair enough? All right, cool beans.
And I will also broadcast them in your chat room too.
Beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Ready, it's 4:36.
I'm gonna share my screen again. We're gonna see all 3 artworks next to each other. And really quickly, would you please share maybe one or two things, a connection that your group noticed amongst the three? So starting to think about the ways that they were connected. We noted before, like, oh, you know, we've got family connections, we've got geography, that sort of thing. Are there any other different kinds of connections you found?
I'll share.
Thank you.
Sarah and I thought that the way that we're connected was a sense of community, a sense of living together, working together, and especially with the girls. We thought that they were really good friends, maybe, or possibly sisters, cousins.
That's
But and
beautiful.
we also talked about the family. It growing up born in the 60s, growing up in late 60s, early and the 70s, it wasn't, especially in Eastern Kentucky, it wasn't uncommon just to jump in the car and, you know, just drive for an hour or two, have a picnic, throw your sodas in the water, in the stream, get them cold. I mean, we did this all the time. This could have been and was, you know, could have been in my neighborhood.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So okay, my friends, I realized that when we came back in, I didn't remember to ask if everybody could just pause, I mean mute your mics so that we can make sure that we're hearing each other clearly. I just so appreciate it. Rachel is adding a connection that you found as you have to work in order for your family to play. The time period looks close together. Debbie, thank you so much for helping us think about also the idea of shared family time. That's beautiful. So we have this connection. So if we were going to present this to students, you might think about presenting it almost like the cells in a comic book or in a graphic novel where each image builds a story. Or similarly, if you were thinking about it from the perspective of writing a thesis-driven paper, you know, if you are still doing a 5-paragraph structure, for instance, your introduction, your 3 pieces of supporting evidence, and your closing, if these were the images of that were the 3 supporting pieces of evidence, you know, it's driving toward a specific thesis. So I'm wondering, in what ways did each image stretch your thinking about the other ones? So we started with the miner, for instance, coming out of or going into the mine. But when we put it next to these other 2 images, how is your thinking stretched or extended?
Our group talked a little bit about how a lot of times like an image like a coal miner is what people would mostly might associate with Kentucky, whereas the other 2 images they may not. So it helped to expand our understanding of the setting or the place, that it's much more complex than just one image could show.
Beautiful, thank you. Anything more? Sarah's noting in the chat, I wonder if the young girls in the family had coal miners in their own family. So what are the interconnections amongst these people? Beautiful. Any other extensions? Oh, Miss Andrea, you got a question that I can answer. Okay, so the image on the left, the coal miner coming out of the mine, was made by Bill Burke. Bill Burke is a photographer who was born in Derby, Connecticut. And you see Pike County in 1975 in the leftmost image. Then in the middle image, you've got a photographer whose name was Ted Wathen, and he was born in Skylight, Kentucky, and he's captured a scene in Clay County in 1977. And then on the far right was there's a man named Robert Hauer who took that photograph, and he was born in Boston, Massachusetts. But the scene we see there is from Louisville in 1976. So they're all Kentucky. They're all Kentucky in the late 70s, but they're taken by 3 different people who were born each in 3 different places. And I'm curious, now that you know that, what new wonders do you have? What new questions? How about I tell you a little more? So these 3 guys were paid by the National Endowment for the Arts as part of a big project wherein photographers were sent across the United States in celebration of the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This was a big project that was meant to capture what is America at 200 years old. And so these photographers went out into different communities and took photographs of, I think it was 31 different locations across the US. So there's this trove of photographs from that time period. What's really interesting, though, is that in some cases, the photographers were taking pictures of their own communities. And in other cases, photographers were taking pictures of other people's communities. So this is really interesting to consider as we start to think about who is the writer or who is the author, who is the photographer, and what does the photographer's experience or shared experience, what comes through in their photograph. So we've got all these great questions in the chat. Why black and white? Well, that's a great question because in the 70s, we surely had color film. So what's the value of black and white? You know, why might we want to capture in that way? Was the photographer doing a larger story on coal miners? That's a great question. So there's all these different questions that we could turn into like research points. My question for you at this point is, if the photographers were charged with taking pictures that tell a story about the United States at its 200th birthday, what story do you think these photographers are telling about Kentucky? Kara's given us a note. It made me think of poverty-stricken areas initially. So maybe this particular selection of 3 images tells a story of poverty. Interesting. What story might these images collectively tell about Kentucky? The Eastern Kentucky struggle. Thank you, Wiley. Anything more? Diversity, landscape, and people. People who were not initially covered in the Declaration of Independence. Really interesting point, Becky. I appreciate that. Marlene is noting the diversity, which is something we noticed at the top. That's really wonderful. So we've already started to cover the point 3 on the share slide here, knowing a little bit more about the photographer shifting our thinking. What I want to do with our last 15 minutes together is to shift into that perspective or point of view taking that we've already started to consider. I'm going to ask you to give these 5 lenses on the left side of the screen a read. So we've got 5 different ways of looking at our now familiar photo of these men in Pike County. We have a potential cultural lens, a governmental lens, an economic lens, a technological lens, or a geographic lens. In each case, it's almost like you're taking, I wish I had like an actual, well, let's use my glasses. Like if I was going to put on my cultural glasses, when I'm looking at this photograph with the intention to uncover something about traditions, rituals, and values, I'm looking with different eyes than if I was going to put on a different set of glasses, looking for evidence of industry and wealth. What I'm going to ask you to do is to jump into your breakout rooms one more time. And this time I'm going to give you just 5 minutes. It's going to be really quick, but you're going to look at the artwork through one selected lens. And I'll put all of these lenses onto one of the slides in the slide deck. So what you're going to do is jump into the breakout room and you're going to choose a lens and you are going to just notice, what do you see in that artwork through that lens? Does that make sense? Beautiful. Okay. So we're just looking at the minor, and you're going to choose one lens and talk about what you see through that lens. Ready, set, breakout rooms, 5 minutes, go.
Like a little bit of Tetris trying to play.
Okay, here's my query. I just asked you to look
Oh,
at an
no, no,
artwork
no.
that like you have just looked at it a million billion times, and you've looked at it for far longer than anyone usually looks at an artwork. But I asked you to look at it through a new lens. So in the chat, I'm going to ask you, what did you notice particularly when you looked through that lens? What popped out of that now familiar minor photo that you didn't necessarily pay as much attention to when you were tasked with looking through the lens? And if you're just coming back, I'm going to reiterate my query. I asked you to look at a familiar photograph with a new lens, a specific lens, and I'm asking you to note in the chat box if you noticed anything new or important when you looked through that lens. Andrea, I love your use of a metaphor. Very nice. Digging deeper with the economical lens. Appreciate it. Anything more? What did you notice? Looking at the minor, we thought of good pay for the time, contentment, technology. Ooh, Greta. Awesome. So noting that this technology that we see in this photograph now, you know, over 40, whatever years, 50 years old, we are thinking, oh, that's like old school, right? But at the time, it was very, very important technology. That's really interesting. Anything more? Governmental lens. There was not a concern about laws and policies to protect the minor and questions about unions. So it's really interesting to think about those people as participant in a government situation. Love it. Okay, so here's my last query to you, and I'm going to ask everybody to participate in this one. Knowing that we can look at the artworks through different lenses, and knowing that you looked through a particular lens, I'm going to ask you, oopsie, sorry, to pose an open-ended question from that lens. So for example, one of the teacher groups that we worked with at the social studies conference recently in Frankfurt, they asked the question, what cultural grip does mining have on families? Because they were looking at this photograph that you're looking at right now through that cultural lens. So they ask, what cultural grip does mining have on families? My question to you right now is, what open-ended question would you pose about this artwork through your lens? We're looking for open-ended questions. And one of the things that I think is really interesting while you're putting those in is how challenging it can be for students to come up with open-ended questions. often they're accustomed to answering closed-ended. Do you like chocolate or pizza? What's your favorite color? Brown or purple? And challenging students to create open-ended questions where there are lots of different ways to answer it is a really interesting skill to develop, especially as we're starting to cultivate maybe research habits of mind or that sort of thing. For those of you who might be interested in the sciences, those open-ended questions lead science thinkers to a lot of different solutions instead of treading the same familiar path. What policies were in place to protect the coal miner, who has the wealth in this industry? How do you think you would feel about getting ready for work at this job during the time period? How did technology impact the daily workday? Beautiful. These are really rich questions. These are really evocative questions that connect not only to some of the thinking that we were doing earlier, but also some of the feeling that we were doing earlier. I really, really appreciate that. How much has our culture in Kentucky changed in the 200 years since the Declaration of Independence? How are cultural ties that we see in our area reflected in the subculture of the mining industry? These are beautiful, huge questions that don't have tidy little answers, and they came all entirely out of your own beautiful minds. So this kind of approach where we started out with a single artwork, we looked slow, then we started to get a little bit bigger and we looked at those 3 artworks and we looked for commonalities and differences. We unpacked a little bit of the historical background, and now we're going ever deeper into these really more abstract spaces. This is my approach, but I'm asking you now, as a closing metacognitive moment, to think about the skills that we use together today. You all are adults. You all are practiced in questions. Educators are the best question askers I've ever met. Some of these skills that we use today may not be the strengths that your students have right now, but they could be. And why would they matter to your students? Why would those skills matter to your students? Why would those skills matter to your community? And why would those skills matter to the world? I'm wondering. Okay, so Andrea is noting that helps students recognize that they have a voice. Beautiful. Why would these skills matter to your students, your community, and the world? What other thoughts do you have? And you're welcome, if you don't have a typable answer, but you're still mulling, you're welcome to unmute and share out loud. I'd be glad to hear your voice. Critical thinking. Thank you, Marcia. Yes, indeed. Remove barriers of communication, a growth mindset, curiosity and awareness, critical thinking skills, family stories and sharing, deeper thinking, beautiful, looking beyond your own circumstances. This is gorgeous. So part of the reason I ask this question is because I needed help when I was in school to realize that history was relevant to me. I actually didn't fall in love with history until I was 32 and starting my job here. And then I was like, holy guacamole, history is a big mess. It's not a march of dates. And it helped me understand the literature of the time. It helped me understand the thinking of the time, the culture of the time, the technology of the time. And it was all through art. But I needed to know why the skills of critical thinking, why history, the historical habits of mind were valuable to me as an individual. The last thing I want to do while these questions and good ideas are filling up the chat box is to just plug. I think Brianna mentioned this last week. We are doing a collaboration with rural schools in Kansas and Kentucky where we're trying to find 2 teachers in each state who might be interested in doing this work with their students and then having their students' work shared on the Smithsonian American Art Museum's website in celebration of the 250th signing of the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we're coming up on that in 2026. And we are looking for ways to elevate and amplify student voice, and then also give students an opportunity to look at each other's communities, not critically to poke holes, but rather to be curious and think about, oh my gosh, I live in New York City and you live in Frankfort, Kentucky, but in fact, there are some things that are the same and there are some things that are different. And why is that? And asking those kinds of questions. So if you're interested in doing this collaboration, I would love to chat further. My email address is in the chat right now, or on the screen right now. I'm going to put it in the chat. And I realized too that I've taken 2 extra minutes of your evening. I am grateful for your time, and I want to be respectful and stop talking. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you so very much, Elizabeth. This is so exciting. Like phenomenal, phenomenal. I think the one thing, well, there was numerous things that stood out. I know all of our teachers, when you said that you fell in love with history because of art, I think everyone on this call, all of my history teachers should have been like, woohoo, you fell in love with history. But all of my Renaissance teachers should have been like, woohoo, because of the arts. Art education matters, the importance of the arts, and having everybody on here and having my history teachers hear that and having my art, I mean, I was just like, woohoo, like that just resonated with me. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. But I love this session. And I think, again, just going back to last week's session, slowing down. Sometimes we want to run through things and it's on, oh, we got to get through this lesson. We got to get through this lesson. But think about how much fun this was for each of us to slow down and think about all of the intentional, think of what we did. You all saw, critical thinking, think of all the learning targets that we just hit through this one lesson of slowing down and looking at, it's so exciting. So I know some of you all were messaging me about the slide deck that's on there. I love all the amazing session. Jamie has probably already got that on your Wakelets. It's already in the Hero Hub, the Renaissance. It's already there because you all know Jamie's amazing. Thank you, Elizabeth. I cannot say how awesome that is. We will also put Elizabeth's email in there for anybody interested in joining. I told you that's going to be amazing and awesome. And then the last thing that I want to add, because I know we are a little over time, but I think it was well worth it. In the chat is our evaluation for today. Remember, this is how you get paid. And I do want to say we've added on this evaluation, there is just a little spot, a little like shout out plug to make sure that you tweet. One, it's great for us, it's great for our grants, but also I put the hashtag for the Smithsonian American Art. Give them some love. That was an incredible session. And again, they're one of those, there's one of those wonderful institutions that when you shower them with love on Twitter, guess what? People notice them. And this is one of those sessions that I think absolutely needs to get some love and recognition. So thank you, Elizabeth, for all that you do, for sending us gifts. So I will also put that little, the form in there if you would like to receive one of those free posters. Again, shout out for an incredible session. So thank you all so much. Yes, I will put the evaluation link back up. And again, you can always find our evaluation links on the calendar. I know sometimes those get lost in the chat. But Elizabeth, thank you so much. This was incredible.
You all are so generous with your thoughts. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I told Elizabeth when we were chatting about this session, I said, they are the best educators in Kentucky. And while you are in breakout rooms, she was like, you didn't lie. So
it's true.
You all are the best. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. And listen, we're going to go ahead and claim tomorrow is going to be a fabulous Friday, just to keep up with our alliteration bit. So fabulous Friday coming your way. Thank you all so much. It's going to be terrific. And I will see some of you all on Saturday in person. If it is our first time meeting, expect a hug. So Saturday is going to be awesome as well. Friday is going to, Friday we don't have anything. Can you believe we don't have anything on schedule for tomorrow? So Friday's just a fabulous Friday in your schools, in your districts. But Saturday we will have an in-person session for some of you all. So I'll see some of you all on Saturday. Have a great evening. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth.